Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Talking to Stephen Meyer. Dr. Meyer is the author of a great book called Darwin's Doubt, and really enjoyed having him on a few weeks ago, so much so that I had to get him back on. This is must reading for anyone who is concerned about, really, I not only would say the propaganda nature of education, but really the quality of education in general. There is such a conventional wisdom that's so pervasive, not only in science, but as your friend and colleague George Gilder has pointed out, in the sphere of economics, that all of these things require, I think, to be challenged if we're going to remain a intellectually robust society and culture. And I think it's so incredibly important that we don't let anything become so orthodox that we're unwilling to challenge it. Your thoughts?
Well, right. George has written this very important book called Knowledge and Power, which is a sequel to his classic book Wealth and Poverty. And George, like me, is challenging what you could call he calls it the materialist superstition. And I'm challenging the materialist superstition in the discussion of the origin of life and in evolutionary biology. And he's challenging it in economics because he wants to. There's a school of thought that says that wealth derives primarily from the material stuff in the ground. And George wants to say, no, there's a missing element in that equation, and that is the role of mind, of creativity. And he uses the example of sand and says that, sand is a semi-infinite natural resource, but it has been turned into an incredibly valuable commodity or technology with a silicon chip. And the value added that gets us from the sand to the silicon chip is what's provided by the ingenuity of the engineer, of the inventor, that structures that material in a way that allows it to perform a valuable function for human beings. And in his view of things, the crucial input into the material world that converts a material resource into something of value is information. It's a way of configuring the matter to make it functional. And this is a direct analog to the discussion that we're having about biology, because what makes biological function possible, what keeps organisms alive, is the information that's stored in DNA, and we now know in other places in the cell. There's multiple layers of information. Cells and animals are hierarchically organized information processing systems. So in both the realm of human technology and the realm of living technology, of biological systems, information is key. And information, we know from experience, again, only comes from a mind. And this is essential to our mind over matter view of reality, and our challenge to the materialist worldview that has dominated Western thinking since the late 19th century, and we think is really on its way out.
Yeah, no question about it. And and what's interesting about what you just talked about, about George Gilder's work, is that the Marxist worldview is that wealth is static and it's a finite amount of it. But the reality is, wealth is only as limited as the human imagination. Using the example of sand that led to silicon chips that have dramatically changed our entire business culture.
Well, absolutely, and look at what's going on in your Eagleford Shale down there in Texas. The whole fracking revolution. Everyone thought that we were running out of oil in the United States until these clever petroleum geologists and engineers figured out a way to get more out of the ground from wells that were thought to be completely used up. So that's another example of ingenuity. Creating wealth, same material resource before and after the invention. What was the difference? It was the invention of the technology that created the value added. And so we have tended, because of and Marx was a big part of that in the 19th century. In fact, the trio of materialist prophets from the 19th century, Marx, Freud, and Darwin, gave us the worldview that affected much of the 20th century. It certainly affected the great totalitarian regimes in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, this materialist worldview.
Yeah.
And Marx told us, Darwin told us where we came from. He provided the creation story for the materialistic worldview. Marx gave us a vision of where we were going, this dialectical materialist system that pointed to this utopian future, economic future. And Freud told us what to do about our guilt. And between the three of them, they answered or purported to answer all the questions that traditional Judeo-Christian religion had answered. And so while they claimed to be scientific, they were also answering all the really fundamental questions of human existence. And as such, they provided a kind of comprehensive secular worldview, or even you could call it a secular religion.
It is a religion, of course. Yeah. Anything that's predicated on a faith system that has no proof, definitive proof, is a religion.
Well, I would say rather, I think that there was, good evidence. There is now very good evidence against this system. They thought there was good evidence for it at the time. I think that what makes it a religion is the kind of questions it addresses and answers, and it's certainly a worldview, or what philosophers would call a worldview.
Yeah.
And it competes directly with the theistic worldview that has had such a big that previous to that had such a big influence in shaping America, and so there's a worldview competition in our culture right now. And what I think is so fascinating is that many of the key questions, in particular this absolutely fundamental question of origins, can be adjudicated by scientific evidence. And whereas in the 19th century Darwin thought the evidence pointed to this unguided, undirected, materialistic explanation for origins, I think the evidence from the 21st century points in the opposite direction, not only in biology, but in another area we really haven't talked much about, but in the whole area of cosmological origins, the origin of the universe. In the 19th century, scientists thought that the universe was finite, that it was infinite, that it had no beginning, it was eternal and self-existent in time and space. And with the new Big Bang cosmology and all of the discoveries that have come online to confirm that, we now have a picture of the universe that suggests that it was finite, that it had a point in time in which even time and space came into existence, which seems to point to some kind of transcendent cause, some cause beyond the material realm that's responsible for the universe itself. So it's a fascinating time to think about these big questions in science, and I find it fascinating that scientific evidence can adjudicate big questions like whether we see design or no design in nature, and whether the universe is finite or infinite.
Yeah, I'm fixing to have to wrap it up. I noticed that you actually have gotten some positive. Before I say this, I do want to mention to learn more about those three prophets of that worldview. A great book is by Paul Johnson called Intellectuals. I'm sure you've read it. Phenomenal book. I suggest people read that book. But I've been happy with some of the reviews I've seen for your book. Talk a little bit about that with about a minute left.
Well, initially we had all these. There were a lot of pre-written reviews that were uploaded onto Amazon the night the book was released a year ago, and so it's gradually risen from a 2-star book to a 4.5-star book, whatever, how these Amazon things go. The actual readers have been weighing in and adding their reviews to it, and it's been kind of gratifying on that sense. But the review that I thought was most important was actually a negative review, and it was in the journal Science, which is the top science journal in the country. It was mildly negative. The reviewer said some nice things about the book, but he on the central issue, he tried to take on the central argument, and he tried to refute it. And I appreciated that because I think he failed, and I think you don't need a PhD in biology to see that. This was a review by Charles Marshall of the University of California, Berkeley, a leading paleontologist, and he said, look, Meyer argues you need all this new information to build the Cambrian animals, but that's not our current understanding. He said our current understanding is that we would just need the evolutionary process to, quote, rewire the genetic regulatory networks that control how already existing genes are expressed. Well, already existing genes are genes. They're full of genetic information. Genetic regulatory networks are also networks of genes that are full of digital code, full of genetic information, and rewiring such networks would require changes in the code, more information. So in order to answer the argument that I make about the need for intelligent design to generate the information, he just presupposed three significant sources of unexplained information. In logic, we call that begging the question. And like I say, you don't need a PhD in biology to see that he really didn't answer the argument.
Yeah, very good stuff. Stephen Meyer, the book is Darwin's Doubts, and you can learn more about it. By the way, what's the website over there at Discovery Institute?
Discoveries is discovery.org, and Darwin's Doubt is darwinsdoubt.com with no apostrophe, and there's a bunch of cool animations on there that I think your listeners might enjoy to see visually what we've been talking about, especially with the way in which the code directs the construction of all the crucial parts inside cells.
Without apostrophe or without apology, you need to check out the book. Thanks so much for being with us, Stephen.
Thank you for having me on again.
You bet. When we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and this is The Price of Business.